The storm came without warning. One moment, the young archaeologist Elara Vance was charting coastal ruins. The next, a wall of black clouds rolled in from the sea, bringing rain like a barrage of stones. The cliffs along this forgotten stretch of shoreline were treacherous, jagged like broken teeth, and as the wind howled, she was forced to abandon her survey. Her boots slipped on the wet rock until, by sheer instinct, she ducked into the shadow of a narrow cleft. The cave yawned before her, dark, breathing cool air that smelled of old stone and salt. Elara hesitated. In her years of fieldwork, she'd learned that nature rarely gives shelter without a price. But the rain was a curtain she couldn't push through, and the thunder shook the very bones of the cliff. She lit her headlamp, the beam cutting into the blackness, and stepped inside. The deeper she went, the more she realized this was no mere hollow carved by the tide. The walls bore markings, shallow, deliberate cuts forming swirling lines and geometric shapes. She brushed away centuries of mineral crust to reveal the designs more clearly. They were not local. Her pulse quickened. She'd seen similar symbols only once before, in an obscure text referencing ancient Alexandria's secret archives. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. Her own thoughts began to crowd in, unbidden. The bedtime stories her father told her of the Library of Alexandria. He spoke of a place where the wisdom of the world had been gathered, scrolls of lost civilizations, maps of lands erased by time, the musings of philosophers whose names history had forgotten. And then, the tragedy, flames, conquest, and centuries of mourning over knowledge turned to ash. She ran her fingers over the carvings again. A strange shiver passed through her, as if the stone itself were whispering to her. "It's just the storm," she told herself. Yet the deeper she went, the more it felt like the cave was guiding her, funneling her towards something it had kept hidden for centuries. The tunnel bent sharply, narrowing until she had to crouch. Her light revealed faint tool marks, suggesting that human hands had shaped this passage long ago. The rain's roar outside faded to a distant murmur. Here, there was only the scrape of her boots and the soft rush of her breath. She thought of the countless hours she'd spent chasing rumors, a submerged temple off the coast of Cyprus, a phantom map of the Hanging Gardens. Each time, she'd been too late or too wrong, and each failure had been a bruise on her career, fuel for those who called her the dreamer with a condescending smile. She pushed on until the tunnel opened into a small chamber. At first glance it seemed empty, just rock, shadows and dust. But in the far corner, beneath a spill of rubble, something gleamed faintly under her light. She knelt, brushing away grit, and found a small bronze medallion embedded in the wall. Its face was engraved with a sigil she knew at once, the royal seal of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Her throat tightened. This was not possible. Not here. Not now. A fresh crack of thunder rolled above, and in that instant, Elara felt the weight of history pressing down on her. This was no accident. This storm had driven her here for a reason. She took a step back, surveying the chamber again. There had to be more. An entrance, a clue, something that would explain the seal's presence. Her lamp flickered across a series of faint grooves in the floor, forming an arc, as though marking the boundary of a doorway long sealed. The hairs on her neck rose. Somewhere in her bones, she knew, she was standing at the threshold of something the world had mourned for 2,000 years, and she was about to open it. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Elara Vance's life. Her hand lingered on the medallion, the metal cool against her skin. Then, with a steadying breath, she began to clear the rubble. The scent of damp stone and mineral dust wrapped around Elara as she worked. Each rock she shifted sent a puff of stale air into her face, air that hadn't moved in centuries. Her fingers ached, but the gleam of the Ptolemaic seal burned in her mind like a beacon. She pried loose a chunk of limestone and froze. Beneath it, carved into the wall, was a mural, faint but unmistakable. Figures robed in flowing Greek chitons and Egyptian linen stood together, passing scrolls between them. Above their heads blazed a golden disk, not the sun, but a stylized lamp. She had seen this image only once before, in a fragmentary papyrus that scholars dismissed as myth. The lamp of Sechat, the goddess of wisdom, said to guard the most sacred storehouse of human knowledge. Her pulse thudded in her ears. It was impossible. The library had been destroyed. Every child who had ever heard its story knew that. Yet here was proof that at least some of its contents had been hidden away. And if that was true... She stepped back, taking in the chamber again. Rainwater trickled down the tunnel behind her, the sound distant, muted, as if the outside world had already faded away. Her headlamp beam swept over the far wall, catching on something metallic, half buried in the stone. It was a hinge, enormous and black with age, fused to the rock like part of a vault. Elara crouched, her heart in her throat. She pressed her hand to the wall, fingers tracing the cool, damp surface until they caught on a thin line, a seam. She followed it in a slow arc until it curved back toward the floor. A hidden door. Her mind drifted unbidden to her father again. How he used to act out the night of the library's fall. She could still see him as a shadow by the fire, telling her about scrolls that described flying machines, cures for forgotten diseases, and maps of continents yet to be rediscovered. He'd always end with the same line. If even one room survived, it could change the world. A flicker of fear crept into her chest. What if she was wrong? What if this was nothing more than a noble's private archive, stripped bare by tomb robbers millennia ago? But the carvings, the seal, the hinge, they told another story. She reached into her satchel for her tools. The steel of her small pry bar scraped against the seam, sending a shiver through her teeth. She worked slowly, mindful of the fragile stone, until the bar slid deeper, hitting something solid. She applied gentle pressure. At first, nothing happened. Then a deep, resonant click echoed through the chamber. The sound wasn't just mechanical. It was alive, reverberating as if it had been waiting for her hand all along. A gust of air hissed through the seam, carrying with it a scent she had never known yet instantly recognized. Old papyrus, aged leather, ink dried for centuries. It was the smell of history itself. She hesitated, her breath shallow. This was the moment. She thought of the ridicule she'd endured, colleagues who dismissed her as chasing fairy tales, patrons who withdrew funding after her last failed dig. None of that mattered now. In the silence, she felt the weight of 1,000 voices urging her forward. Her lamp's beam caught the faint shimmer of gold through the widening crack. She pried again, harder this time, until the gap was wide enough for her to slip inside. What lay beyond made her knees buckle. A corridor stretched ahead, its walls lined with cedar shelves. Upon them sat scrolls in clay jars, codices bound in leather, stacks of parchment sealed with wax. The air was heavy, undisturbed, sacred, She took one trembling step inside, her fingers itching to touch the nearest scroll. Behind her, the storm raged unseen, and the sea pounded the cliffs. But down here, the world was still. The library was waiting. Elara stood frozen in the threshold, the beam of her headlamp sweeping across a sight no living eyes had seen in over 2,000 years. The corridor was narrow but long, stretching into darkness like a vein of pure gold running through the earth. The shelves were carved directly into the stone, the cedar planks still intact. Their surfaces darkened with age, but astonishingly free of decay. Her breath came slow, reverent. She stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into a layer of ancient dust. Every movement felt sacrilegious, like she was treading on holy ground. Halfway down the corridor, her light caught on a jar capped with a wax seal. The seal bore the same Ptolemaic emblem she had found outside, the open papyrus plant flanked by twin cobras. Her fingers hovered above it, trembling. She wanted to open it, to see the ink strokes of a hand that had lived and died long before her own ancestors had walked the earth. But something stopped her. Her gaze drifted to the end of the corridor where the stone seemed to ripple faintly, as if carved into an archway. She moved toward it, her lamp illuminating another set of markings, not merely decorative this time, but functional. Lines of Greek and Demotic script intertwined, forming an inscription. To know is to wield fire. To wield fire is to bear the burden of gods. The words struck her like a cold wind. Knowledge here was not merely to be admired, it was to be feared. She reached for her camera instinctively, but then lowered it again. Documenting this meant bringing the world into it, and she wasn't ready. Not yet. Her mind flashed back to a moment years ago in graduate school when she had presented her paper on hidden archives. A senior historian had laughed outright, telling her in front of the entire lecture hall that she had a novelist's imagination, not a scholar's discipline. She had never forgotten his smirk. Now, in the stillness of this buried corridor, she felt the weight of proving him wrong. She knelt beside one of the lower shelves, brushing dust from a bundle of papyrus bound in red cord. It was astonishingly well preserved. The climate of the cave must have been perfect, a natural vault against moisture and decay. The cord cracked slightly as she touched it, and she quickly stopped, unwilling to risk damage. Beyond the archway, she saw it, a solid wall of stone, but with faint outlines of another door. This one was different, sealed entirely with a bronze plate, its surface engraved with concentric circles and symbols she didn't recognize. Around its edges were small indentations, lock mechanisms perhaps. Her heart pounded harder. If the outer chamber contained this much, what could be behind this second door? A sudden, hollow sound echoed through the corridor, a faint shift of stone behind her. She spun, her light darting over the shelves. Nothing moved. Still, the air felt heavier now, as if the cave itself was aware of her presence. She returned her focus to the bronze door, pressing her palm to its surface. It was cool, unnervingly so, and vibrated faintly under her touch. She leaned closer, her breath fogging on the metal. There, etched so fine she nearly missed it, was a single Greek word. Kleidi. Key. The message was clear. The real treasure was not yet in her grasp. Determined, Elara traced the door's engravings again, memorizing each curve and angle. She didn't know it yet, but this second barrier would not open easily, and whatever lay beyond would force her to question everything she believed about history, truth, and the cost of discovery. The cave had given her a glimpse. Now it demanded a price. The bronze plate loomed before Elara like the lid of a sarcophagus, daring her to disturb what it protected. She ran her fingertips along the concentric circles, noting how the grooves deepened in places, perhaps intentionally worn by centuries of use. Her training told her this was no ordinary lock. It was a puzzle designed not only to keep intruders out, but to test the worthiness of the one who sought entry. From her satchel she withdrew a notebook, flipping to a page where she had sketched the symbols from the outer medallion. She compared them to those on the plate. Some matched, but others were entirely new, curved glyphs that almost resembled constellations. Her mind sparked with a memory. An obscure footnote in a translated Alexandrian Codex describing the Chamber of the Unburned, a place sealed with a mechanism that required the alignment of the stars as they appeared on the night the library first opened its doors. Her headlamp's beam caught the dust motes swirling in the air, and she realized something. These symbols weren't random, they formed a celestial map. Working slowly, she twisted the first ring, aligning it with the position of Orion as she recalled it from ancient charts. The second ring moved reluctantly, the metal groaning in protest, until she aligned the Pleiades cluster. On the third ring, she hesitated. This constellation she did not know. The silence pressed against her ears. Somewhere deep inside, she heard her father's voice again. Knowledge is power, Elara, but it's also responsibility. She took a breath, recalling that obscure papyrus fragment she'd studied in her early career, the one scholars dismissed. It mentioned the Keeper's Star, a lone light that guided travelers to safe harbor. Closing her eyes, she pictured the drawing, its position relative to familiar constellations. Her fingers found the matching symbol on the bronze plate. She rotated the ring until it clicked into place. The entire door shuddered. A faint hiss escaped as the ancient seal released, and with a sound like stone sighing, the plate began to shift inward. When the gap widened, a wave of air rolled over her, dry, heavy, and steeped in the scent of ink, cedar, and something faintly metallic. She stepped inside, her lamp beam cutting into the gloom. Her breath caught. Before her stretched a vast chamber, far larger than the narrow corridor outside. Marble columns rose to a vaulted ceiling, painted with deep blues and flecked with gold to mimic the night sky. Between the columns were rows upon rows of shelves, each one laden with scrolls, tablets, and codices bound in embossed leather. Gilded lamps, long extinguished, hung from bronze chains, their designs echoing the motif of the Lamp of Sachat. And in the center of the room, upon a low stone pedestal, lay a single codex, unlike any she had ever seen. Its cover was of polished ebony, inlaid with gold leaf that formed a geometric pattern she could not decipher. Her hand trembled as she reached toward it, until her eyes caught the inscription at the base of the pedestal. The words, in both Greek and Egyptian, read, "To open me is to bind your fate with mine." She withdrew her hand slowly, her mind whirling. This was no mere archive. This was curated, guarded, deliberately hidden from the world for reasons she could not yet fathom. In the silence, she became aware of something else. A faint sound, so soft she almost missed it. Footsteps. She spun, her heart leaping into her throat. The beam of her lamp fell upon the archway she had entered through. It was empty, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Elara's breath stalled in her chest. The sound was subtle, muffled by the thick air, but unmistakable. Another presence in the chamber. She killed her headlamp instantly, plunging the room into darkness. Her eyes strained against the black, ears searching for the faintest movement. The steps came again, deliberate, unhurried. Whoever, or whatever, was here didn't fear being discovered. She slid silently behind one of the marble columns, her back pressed against the cool stone. The scent of dust and aged parchment was so dense it felt tangible, clinging to her skin. Then a low rasp broke the silence. A voice, speaking in a language she couldn't immediately place. It was old, syllables weighted with something ceremonial. As her ears adjusted, she realized it was Greek, though archaic in form, the kind she'd only encountered in ancient manuscripts. The voice stopped. A sudden flare of light burst in the center of the room. Not the harsh glare of modern flashlights, but a warm, golden glow. Firelight. In its flickering radius stood a man. His frame was wiry but strong, his skin weathered, his robe a deep indigo embroidered with gold thread. His hair was long and silvered, his beard neatly braided. In his right hand, he held a staff topped with a carved ibis, the symbol of Thoth, god of wisdom. His eyes found hers immediately, as if he had known all along where she hid. "You should not be here," he said in measured, flawless Greek. Elara's heart pounded, but she stepped into the open, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. Neither should this place exist. Yet here we are. The man's gaze did not waver. It exists because it must. It is hidden because it must be. She glanced at the shelves surrounding them, at the ebony Codex still resting on its pedestal. The world has lost too much knowledge. If you think you can keep this buried forever, you're wrong. He stepped closer, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. Do you believe knowledge is always a gift? That every truth should be revealed, no matter the cost? The words echoed the inscription she had read earlier. To know is to wield fire. She swallowed. I believe ignorance is a greater danger. The man studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to the Codex. This is the key, he said quietly. Not to this library. He swept his arm to encompass the shelves, but to every library that has ever existed and everyone that will be. Its words can unite civilizations or destroy them utterly. Her mind reeled. Then why hide it here? He met her eyes. Because the last time it was opened, the world burned. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the whisper of the storm outside the cave. Elara's thoughts churned. Here was the validation she had sought her whole career, yet it came tangled in a moral snare. Finally, the man spoke again. You may take what you can carry from these shelves, but the Codex stays. Swear it, and you leave alive. Refuse. His voice trailed off, but the warning was clear. She felt the weight of the choice pressing against her ribs. Knowledge that could reshape humanity was within arm's reach, yet so was the possibility of repeating history's darkest mistakes. Her fingers curled into fists. Whatever decision she made now would define not only her life, but perhaps the fate of the world itself. The silence between them thickened, heavy as the air in the chamber. Elara's mind raced, each thought cutting against the next like shards of glass. The shelves surrounding her were filled with more than just parchment and ink. They were filled with the possibility of rewriting history. She took a slow step toward the Codex, her boots whispering over the stone floor. The guardian's grip tightened on his staff. You test my patience, he warned, his voice low but resonant. Elara met his gaze, refusing to look away. You speak as if you own this knowledge. But if it belongs to anyone, it belongs to all of humanity. You're just one man. How can you decide what the world should or shouldn't know? A flicker of pain crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. Because I have seen what happens when the wrong hands open the wrong words. Once I believed as you do. Once I was like you. He stepped closer, the firelight catching the lines around his eyes. My name is Nicandros. I was a scholar of Alexandria on the night the flames took it. I carried what I could into the tunnels, thinking I could save the world's wisdom. But when I emerged weeks later, I found that what I saved had been twisted, used to build weapons to enslave minds. The Codex, it is a mirror. It gives what is asked of it, but never without a cost. Elara's breath hitched. You mean it answers questions? Nicandros nodded once. Any question, any problem. But the truth it gives is absolute, and those who hold absolute truth rarely choose mercy. Her heart pounded. This was no mere library. It was a well of power. She glanced over her shoulder at the scrolls and tomes, thinking of the endless hours she had spent in archives, chasing scraps of history. Here was the culmination of every dream she'd dared to have. But before she could speak, a sound cut through the air, a metallic clang echoing from the outer corridor. Nicandros's head snapped toward it, his eyes narrowing. Others are here. Elara's pulse spiked. Others? He moved swiftly toward the entrance, his robe swirling behind him. You were followed. The seal must have drawn attention. She felt a wave of cold dread. If Nicandros was right, then whoever had found their way in would see not just the shelves, but the Codex. And unlike her, they might not hesitate to use it. Nicandros turned back to her, his voice sharp. The choice is no longer yours alone. If you want this place to survive, you will help me protect it. Outside, muffled voices grew louder, modern, urgent, in languages Elara recognized. One was English, the clipped tone of authority. The other spoke in rapid Arabic. Whoever they were close. She looked from Nicandros to the Codex, then toward the shadows beyond the shelves. Her instincts screamed at her. She had only seconds to decide. She could run deeper into the library and vanish into its labyrinth. She could stand beside Nicandros and defend the Codex. Or she could take it and face the consequences later. Her fingers twitched toward her satchel. The voices reached the archway. Boots scraped against stone. The sanctuary of the ages was about to become a battlefield. The first figure stepped into the chamber, a tall man in tactical gear, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Behind him came two more, one carrying a rifle, the other a compact camera already rolling. The smell of damp stone mixed with the faint scent of gun oil. Nicandros shifted his grip on the staff, his posture tightening. "Leave now," he said, his voice echoing off the marble columns. The man with the flashlight smirked. "We're not here for your bedtime stories, old man. We're here for the book." His accent was American, his tone casual, but edged with threat. Elara felt her chest tighten. The Codex. Of course they knew. No one comes this deep without a target. The cameraman circled, capturing wide shots of the chamber. "Do you have any idea what this will be worth?" he muttered, not to Elara, not to Nicandros, but to himself, already counting numbers in his head. Nicandros stepped between them and the pedestal. "This knowledge will not leave here." The rifleman raised his weapon just enough to make his point. "Then you'll be leaving in a different way." Elara's instincts screamed at her to move, to hide, but something else rose in her, a sharp, unyielding anger. She'd spent her career being dismissed, overlooked, and talked over by people like this. Now they stood in front of the greatest find in human history, ready to sell it to the highest bidder. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. The flashlight swung toward her, momentarily blinding her. "You can't just take it. You don't know what it is." The leader's grin widened. "That's the beauty of it. We don't need to know. We just need to own it." Nicandros moved first, striking the rifle with his staff, sending it clattering across the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot through the chamber. The rifleman lunged, but Nicandros was faster, his movements sharp and practiced. The cameraman backed toward the exit, still filming, but Elara intercepted him, shoving him against a column. The camera fell, its screen splintering. "Delete the footage," she demanded, her voice shaking with adrenaline. The leader seized the moment, darting toward the Codex. Elara's eyes caught the gleam of the gold inlay as his hands closed over it. A deep, resonant hum filled the air. The leader froze, his eyes widening. The Codex began to glow faintly, lines of light tracing its patterns like veins of fire. He tried to pull away, but his hands seemed fused to it. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Nicandros grabbed Elara's arm and yanked her back. "Don't look," he warned. But she couldn't help it. She saw the man's eyes go glassy, his body convulsing as if every secret he'd ever buried was being torn from him. Then it was over. The Codex released him, and he crumpled to the floor, breathing but vacant, his gaze unfocused. The other two fled, their footsteps retreating rapidly down the corridor. Elara stared at the man on the floor, her pulse still thundering. "What did it do to him?" Nicandros's face was grim. "It showed him the truth he feared most. Few survive that." She swallowed hard, the implications sinking in. The Codex was powerful, too powerful. But even as she thought it, a part of her still whispered, "Imagine what you could learn." Her eyes drifted back to the pedestal. The Codex lay there, silent, as if nothing had happened, waiting. Weeks later, the world above had already shifted, though most of humanity would never know why. The cave was sealed again. The entrance collapsed under a carefully orchestrated rockfall. The storm that had first driven Elara inside felt like a lifetime ago. She sat now at a small wooden desk in a coastal safehouse, the scent of brine wafting through the open shutters. Outside, gulls wheeled over a grey, restless sea. A stack of ancient scrolls lay in front of her, each one wrapped in layers of cloth to protect them from the humid air. She had taken only what she could carry without drawing suspicion. Maps of forgotten trade routes, treatises on medicine far ahead of their time, a handful of astronomical charts that might rewrite humanity's understanding of the heavens. Nicandros had vanished the night they sealed the chamber, slipping into the darkness without farewell. She suspected it was deliberate. He was a man of the library, and she was not. Their paths had crossed because fate demanded it, and now they diverged. She had tried to forget the Codex, but it returned in her thoughts, unbidden. Its black cover, its gold inlay, the hum in the air when it awakened. It lingered in her mind like the aftertaste of something sweet and dangerous. She still felt the pull, the temptation to go back, to open it just once. The man who had touched it that night remained in a hospital bed, unresponsive, his doctors baffled. Elara had visited him once, under a false name. She had looked into his vacant eyes and seen only the echo of a man who had thought himself untouchable. It was a warning she carried like a brand. News of a possible archaeological site along the coast had surfaced briefly in the media, but without photographs or verifiable evidence, the story faded. Those who had chased her down into the cave were either in hiding or too afraid to speak. She spent her days transcribing and translating the scrolls she had rescued, sharing carefully chosen fragments with trusted scholars under strict confidentiality. The world was not ready for the full weight of what she had seen. That much she now understood. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, painting the water in streaks of crimson and gold, she took her notebook to the balcony. She thought of her father, of the nights they had sat together under the stars, imagining what might be hidden in the darkness. He had been right. If even one room of the library had survived, it could change the world. But what he hadn't said, what she now knew, was that not every change was for the better. Her pen hovered over the page as she began to write her own account, not for publication, not for glory, just a record, so that if one day the seals were broken again, someone might understand the stakes. At the bottom of the final page, she wrote the lesson she had learned in letters so sharp they nearly tore the paper. Knowledge is not light or darkness. It is fire, and fire must be watched. She closed the notebook, the last rays of sun slipping below the horizon. Somewhere far beneath the cliffs, the Codex waited in silence, and she prayed it would stay that way. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. The sea kept its secrets. So would she.